In this episode, we step into one of Rome's darkest moments in Gaul, the ambush of Ambiorix. A tribal leader surrounded by Roman legions would use deception, terrain, and timing to annihilate an entire Roman force. We'll follow how Caesar's trusted officers were deceived, how their men marched straight into the trap, and how the ambush unfolded in brutal, relentless detail. From the cunning plan to the desperate Roman defense, this is the story of Ambiorix's revolt, the uprising that humiliated Caesar himself. Following the siege of the Atuatuci in 57 before Christ, most of the Belgic tribes capitulated and submitted to Roman authority, effectively bringing Caesar's northern campaign to a close. With Belgic resistance broken, Caesar turned his attention toward Britain, seeking to extend Roman influence beyond the Channel. Upon returning from the British expedition, he convened a council of Gallic tribal leaders to reaffirm loyalty and oversee the deployment of his legions into winter quarters. The year's harvest was notably poor, which Caesar attributed to an unusually dry summer. Yet it's more likely that years of relentless campaigning had already devastated agriculture across the region. Because of these conditions, Caesar's 8 legions were scattered widely, each stationed among Belgic communities whose loyalty to Rome remained uncertain. In previous winters, Caesar had quickly returned to Cisalpine Gaul once his troops were settled, but this time he lingered longer than usual, ensuring his legions were firmly in place before his departure. Each legion was assigned to the authority of either a legate or Caesar's quaestor, the latter position that year being held by Marcus Crassus. Caesar instructed these officers to report back promptly once their legions had reached their designated territories and established adequately fortified camps. Contemporary accounts indicate that Quintus Tullius Cicero was granted the discretion to select the precise location for his legion's encampment, suggesting that other legates may have enjoyed a similar level of autonomy in determining the most defensible and practical sites for their winter quarters. Before departing for Britain in the summer of 54 before Christ, Caesar, serving as proconsul, had intervened in a leadership dispute among the Treveri, a powerful Belgic tribe. The rival who lost influence due to Roman interference was Indutiomarus. At the time, Indutiomarus appeared to submit, visiting Caesar's camp and surrendering 200 hostages as a token of loyalty. But during the following winter, he saw his chance to strike back. With Caesar's legions scattered across Gaul in separate winter quarters, the Roman army was dangerously exposed. Indutiomarus began rallying his faction within the Treveri and plotted an attack on the legion under Titus Labienus, stationed in Treveran territory. Yet he knew his tribe alone could not defeat Rome, so he sought to ignite rebellion among neighboring chieftains who also chafed under Roman rule. What followed was not a single organized revolt, but a chain reaction. Separate uprisings flaring almost at once, each fueling the next and forcing the Romans to stretch their strength thin. The first and most dangerous of these came not from the Treveri, but from the Eburones, who chose Ambiorix and Catuvolcus as their war leaders. Together, they would deliver one of the few crushing defeats Caesar's army ever suffered during the Gallic campaigns. 15 cohorts were stationed among the Eburones at a site known as Atuatuca, likely near modern Liège or Tongres, though its exact location remains uncertain. This force included the entire 14th Legion, along with 5 additional cohorts of unclear origin, possibly detachments from other legions or newly formed units. Around this time, Caesar had begun raising fresh cohorts in Transalpine Gaul, made up of recruits who did not yet hold full Latin citizenship, unlike those from Cisalpine Gaul. Caesar also notes the presence of Spanish cavalry accompanying the legionaries, and it is possible that other auxiliary troops were attached to the force as well. In total, the contingent probably numbered between 6,000 and 8,000 men. Command was shared between 2 of Caesar's legates, Quintus Titurius Sabinus and Lucius Aurunculeius Cotta, both seasoned officers who had previously led independent commands, though neither was noted for bold initiative. The two had worked together earlier during the campaign against the Menapi in 55 before Christ, and Caesar's account indicates that they held joint authority at Atuatuca, rather than one commanding over the other. According to Caesar's account, the forces of Ambiorix were roughly equal in number to those commanded by Sabinus and Cotta. The Eburones launched a sudden assault on Roman soldiers who had gone out from camp to gather firewood, cutting down several before the rest managed to flee back inside. Pursued by Ambiorix and his warband, the Romans scrambled to arms, manning the ramparts and readying for defense. On one flank, a detachment of Spanish cavalry counterattacked, clashing briefly with the enemy and driving them back. Realizing that their initial strike had failed, Ambiorix and his men withdrew from the field, bringing the first encounter to an end. Then Ambiorix stepped forward under a flag of truce. He claimed that he had been forced by his own people to take up arms against Rome. Speaking with false humility, he warned the Roman envoys of a vast conspiracy spreading across Gaul, that on this very day, every tribe would rise and strike the legions stationed in their lands. Yet, invoking the personal favor Caesar had once shown him, Ambiorix offered the Romans a way out, safe passage, he said, to rejoin either of the two nearby legions stationed within 50 miles. The Roman envoys, Quintus Junius and Gaius Arpaneus, returned to camp and relayed Ambiorix's message. Throughout the night, the two commanders, Sabinus and Cotta, argued over what to do next. Sabinus urged that they accept Ambiorix's offer and march out to link up with the nearest Roman legion. Cotta, however, strongly disagreed. He maintained that leaving their post would mean disobeying Caesar's direct orders, and that their camp was well provisioned and secure. Cotta warned that no Roman commander should ever trust the words or promises of an enemy, least of all one who had just tried to destroy them. Quintus Titurius Sabinus denied that fear guided his judgment. He argued that Caesar had already left for Italy, leaving them cut off and alone. The Germanic tribes, he warned, would soon join the Eburones, creating an enemy too large to resist. The Eburones, he reasoned, would never have dared attack a Roman legion without strong allies behind them. Sabinus believed it was wiser to march toward the nearest Roman legion and face any threat together, rather than remain trapped and risk starvation under siege. The officers pressed both commanders to agree on a single course of action, warning that division would doom them all. At last, Cotta gave in, and Sabinus's plan was accepted. Orders were given for the troops to march at dawn. The soldiers stayed awake through the night, sorting their gear, deciding what to carry and what winter supplies to leave behind. Many tried to reassure themselves that remaining in camp was too dangerous, that exhaustion from constant watches would soon break their strength. When morning came, they marched out, trusting Ambiorix as though he were an ally, not an enemy. The columns stretched long and uneven across the valley, slowed by heavy baggage and the sheer mass of men on the move. Realizing from the noise and movement during the night that the Romans were preparing to march, the enemy set a double ambush in the nearby woods, about 3 kilometers from the Roman camp. They chose a hidden, elevated position that gave them every advantage. When most of the Roman column had descended into a broad ravine, the trap was sprung. Warriors erupted from both sides, striking the rear guard, blocking the vanguard, and forcing the Romans to fight in ground that left them helplessly exposed. Caesar notes that Sabinus lost his composure, running from cohort to cohort, giving frantic and useless orders. Cotta, in contrast, remained calm, performing both his duty as a commander and as a soldier. Yet this course of action, though understandable in such a desperate moment, had tragic results. It drained the Romans of hope and emboldened the enemy, for their disorder could only signal fear and despair. Panic spread through the ranks. Men abandoned their standards, rushing to the baggage train to grab whatever they valued most. Soon, the entire army dissolved into chaos, filled with shouting, confusion, and the cries of desperate men. The Eburones, however, were far from reckless. Their leaders ordered that no warrior was to break ranks. The spoils of battle would be theirs, but only if they held their positions and maintained discipline. Everything the Romans left behind would belong to them once victory was secured. In short, they were reminded that both survival and reward depended entirely on destroying the enemy. The Eburones fought with remarkable courage and determination, matching the Romans in fighting spirit. The Roman soldiers, though abandoned by both their commander and by fortune, placed their only hope of survival in their own bravery. Whenever a Roman cohort charged, many of the enemy fell at that point. Seeing this, Ambiorix changed tactics. He ordered his warriors to hurl their missiles from a distance and avoid close combat. They were to give ground when the Romans advanced, using their lighter arms and greater speed to fall back without danger. And once the Romans pulled back to reform around their standards, the Eburones were to surge forward again. The Eburones followed Ambiorix's instructions precisely. Whenever a Roman cohort broke formation and charged forward, the enemy quickly fell back. This left the attacking Romans exposed on the flanks, allowing the Gauls to shower them with missiles from both sides. When the Romans tried to return to their original position, they often found themselves trapped, hemmed in by the warriors who had retreated and by those who had held their ground. If the Romans stayed where they were, their tight formation gave little protection. Their courage meant nothing against the endless hail of missiles from so great a host. Despite these crushing disadvantages and mounting wounds, the Romans held their ground with iron discipline and resolve. The fighting raged from dawn until mid-afternoon. Though bloodied and exhausted, they stood with honor and endurance. During the struggle, Titus Balventius, a brave and respected officer who had commanded the 1st century the year before, was struck in both thighs by a javelin. Quintus Lucanius, another centurion, was cut down while trying to save his surrounded son, and Lucius Cotta, the legate, was struck full in the face by a sling stone as he moved along the line, urging his men to stand firm. Shaken by the heavy losses, Sabinus spotted Ambiorix in the distance, rallying his warriors. Desperate to end the slaughter, he sent his interpreter, Gnaeus Pompeius, to beg Ambiorix for mercy, to spare him and his men. Ambiorix replied that if Sabinus wished to speak with him directly, he was free to do so. He claimed he would try to persuade his followers to spare the Romans' lives, and gave his personal assurance that Sabinus himself would not be harmed. Sabinus then sent word to the wounded Cotta asking him to join in the parley. He argued that negotiation might still save them and their soldiers. But Cotta refused. He would not go to treat with an armed enemy, and he held to that decision, even in the face of ruin. Sabinus gathered the remaining tribunes and senior centurions around him and decided to approach Ambiorix in person. When he drew near, Ambiorix ordered him to lay down his weapons. Sabinus obeyed and instructed his men to do the same. As the two began to speak, Ambiorix deliberately dragged out the conversation, using it as a distraction while his warriors crept in and surrounded the unarmed Romans. Then, in an instant, the trap was sprung. Ambiorix's men rushed forward and cut down Sabinus and his officers where they stood. With a great shout, the Belgic warriors charged as one against the remaining Romans. Lucius Cotta, wounded but still fighting bravely, was slain along with most of his men. The Roman column was annihilated. The few Romans who survived the massacre fled in two directions. The larger group retreated to the very camp they had abandoned earlier, hastily closing the gates behind them. The Eburones pursued and surrounded the fort. When the Romans realized they could not withstand another assault, many chose to take their own lives rather than fall into enemy hands. A smaller number of survivors managed to escape through the forests and eventually reached the camp of Titus Labienus, where they reported the disaster. In total, an entire legion, 5 cohorts, and several auxiliary units, between 6,000 and 9,000 men, were lost. The exact number of Belgic casualties is unknown, but it was almost certainly far lower than that of the Romans. After the battle, Ambiorix stripped the fallen Romans of their weapons and armor, using them as trophies of his victory. He immediately led his warriors to the territory of the Aduatuci, where he boasted of his triumph and displayed the captured arms as proof. The Aduatuci soon joined his rebellion, followed by the Nervii. Messengers were then sent across Gaul, spreading word of the Roman defeat and urging other tribes to rise. Ambiorix's army quickly swelled to more than twice its original size, and he grew confident that the remaining Roman forces in Gaul could be destroyed. His first target was the camp of Quintus Cicero, stationed in Nervian territory. But that is where we will pause for now. The continuation of Ambiorix's revolt will be explored in the next episode.